Set in the 1980s New York, the movie covers the story of a young Italian-American troubled boy who falls in love with a Jewish girl. In the opening scene, we see Gio, an attractive young man with a big passion for cars. He inspects his car before calling out to his friends Chris and Anthony to make arrangements for the evening. In the evening, they begin with their usual routine, getting ready to cruise the town before they end up at a diner. The night begins with a stroll around the block, and luck seems to be on their side as they encounter some girls who want to get intimate with them. They end up gathering at a parking lot. After making a U-turn, Gino gets done with business first, so he's the first one to pull out of the parking lot while his friends end up staying. After having some fun, Gino decides to go to a gathering where he greets some people. Feeling rebellious, he agrees to race another fast car, and as the Italian flag goes down, he puts his foot on the pedal, trying his best to win the race. Luckily, he ends up winning, and while he's celebrating with his friends, he gets approached by a girl. Naturally, he picks her up and they go to a parking lot where she tries to pleasure him. However, Gino doesn't seem to be all there, as a sad expression can be noticed on his face. Concerned, the girl asks if he's all right, and he assures her that he is, but she doesn't seem to believe him. After doing the dirty, he tries dropping her off, but she asks whether they're going to eat something. Feeling rather awkward, he makes up an excuse that there won't be any space for her at the boys' table. Opening her door, he signals for her to get out, and that's exactly what she does. He drives off without a worry, but she starts cussing him out at the top of her voice. Finally, he meets up with his friends at the diner, where they can enjoy a feast. However, instead of ordering the usual, he looks at the menu for something new. His friends get confused, wondering why he would order something else, when he knows that their usual is always good. But it's not the food that he wants to change, it's his life. Repeating the same thing every night has clearly gotten the best of him. That's why he tries making small changes here and there. He ends up changing his mind, so they enjoy the usual as always. The news on the TV catches Chris's attention, so he listens carefully. His eyes sparkle, and his excitement grows as the news reporter informs the viewers that new cars from Chicago will be brought to the city. Knowing that they won't include him, Anthony tries to plead with them, but Chris thinks that it's a bad idea because he'll mess the whole thing up. Gio can't help but laugh at how clumsy their friend is, so bringing him on the mission would be catastrophic. The following morning, the boys decide to take action. Driving to the Shea Stadium, they park their car and try to be as unnoticeable as they can. Given that there are many parked cars on the sidewalk, they inspect each one before they get to the one that is easily accessible. Chris guards Gino as he tries to snatch the radio as quickly as possible. Finally, he gets it and they walk off nonchalantly, pretending like nothing had happened. While Gino keeps his cool, Chris can't help but jump for joy, as the stereo is of big value. Later in the day, they visit their friend, who has no trouble buying stolen stereos. They settle on a good price, and the boys leave happy. Getting ready to go out in the evening, Gio gets stopped by his father, who asks him to have dinner with them. Gio assures him that he has no problem grabbing a slice of pizza, but his father doesn't want to hear it. As they sit by the table, his father begins questioning him as to why he goes out so much. He's never home, and that bothers all of them. Not only that, he hasn't brought an eligible girl home, so they ask when he plans on settling down. Having had enough, he gets up and leaves the table in a hurry. Same as every other night, the boys ride around town in Gio's expensive car, trying to find someone they can link up with. Seeing a small white car in front of them, he assumes that a girl is driving it, so he follows it to see where they're headed. Usually, if a girl is interested, she'll do a U-turn, but the car keeps going straight. Intrigued, he decides to follow it, and they end up at a red light. Taking a look at who's driving, Gio falls in love instantly, as he sees that the girl is very attractive. He goes out of his way to turn up the music and serenade her on the spot. The girl driving and her friends start laughing as they find his efforts ridiculous. Soon, the light turns green, so they start moving. Unfortunately, Gio gets pulled over by a cop, and therefore loses sight of the little white car. Not only has he lost the girl he strongly likes, but Gio ends up getting a fine for having the music too loud. Frustrated, he decides to get himself an ice cream. It seems that Faith is on his side as he spots the girl from the car on the side of the ice cream shop. Wasting no time, he approaches her, and she seems to be amused by his demeanor. He flirts openly with her, thinking that it would score him her number. However, she only tells him her name and denies going out with him. As she goes back to her car, he stands dumbfounded, because no girl has ever rejected him. Luckily, his friends encourage him to go after her, and he catches up to her. Francesca's friend assumes that he only wants to be intimate with her, and even though he wants more, he can't deny the fact that he wants to sleep with her. Surprisingly, Francesca lets him know that she's down to do the dirty, and surely enough, we see them playing the devil's tango in the back of Gio's car. After some fun time, they sit in the car trying to catch their breath when Gio asks for her phone number. Although hesitant, she writes it on his wrist. Moving fast, he invites her to the diner with him, but she turns down his invitation. He meets with the boys without her, and they start making fun of him for not being able to pleasure her. Some time passes, but Gio can't seem to get her out of his mind. While at work, he decides to call her only to discover that the number she gave him was fake. Pissed off, he tells Chris and Anthony, who can't believe that she would do something like that either. Despite them comforting him, he still can't seem to let her out of his mind. In the end, Chris advises him to let her go since there's nothing he can do. Spotting a nice Porsche in front of them, Chris asks him to pull up, but Gio reminds him that expensive cars are out of discussion. Feeling brave, Chris assures him that everything will be fine, and only asks Gio to trust him. As per usual, Chris tries opening the door with a metal pipe. However, his method doesn't seem to work on an expensive car. Frustrated, he smashes the car window and soon steals the radio. Gio watches in shock as Chris does everything that he shouldn't do. Getting into the car, Gio speeds off while cursing at Chris. However, as they pass the danger zone, they can't help but feel excited for the expensive stereo. Their excitement fades as he focuses on driving, but something catches his eye. Pulling up to the sidewalk, he parks the car and gets out of it nonchalantly. Walking up to the cafe, he stands in front of it and we see Francesca in a whole different look. He calls out for her, but her friends start laughing at him. Confused, he stares at her as she admits that her name is not Francesca, but Jessica Weinberg. Humiliated, he says nothing but goes back to his car. In the evening, he enjoys dinner with his family when his beepers start ringing. He shuts it off to enjoy dinner, but then the beeper rings once again after he showers. He calls the number through his home phone, and Jessica appears to be on the line. She apologizes, feeling bad about misleading him, but he assures her that everything's fine. She lets him know that she's living in the suburbs and having a rather boring summer, so hooking up with him has been the highlight of her summer. Intrigued, he asks why she's calling him, and she reminds him that she's called to apologize. Not believing her, he assumes that she's called because she wants to see him again. She giggles, trying to hide the fact that she does. Given that she's not from their town, he decides to show her around. So, he invites her that same evening to drive around the city and chill. Rightfully so, Chris criticizes him for taking her out after she screwed him over. Gio doesn't listen to anyone when it comes to her, which is why we see them together in the evening. They pass by many hotspots where specific people go out, and he explains everything to her. Jokingly, he tells her that she'll be perfect in the glow-in-the-dark girl group, as someone who gives him that vibe. Wanting to speed things up, he takes her to the race gathering where he races with her in the car. Before the race starts, he sees that she's nervously breathing, so he assures her that she's in safe hands, making her relax. However, as the Italian flag goes down, Jessica becomes petrified by how fast they're going. As expected, Gio ends up winning the race, but he notices Jessica shaking in the driver's seat. Concerned, he looks at her, but she turns her fear into excitement as she screams at the top of her lungs. Pleasantly surprised, he asks her if she's hungry, and she lets him know that she's starved. Unlike the first girl in the movie, Gio ends up taking Jessica to the diner with his boys. They order their food, and trying to impress her, he orders something else. They sit in silence enjoying their food when Gio motions to his friends to start a conversation with her. They don't have a strong start, but end up arguing about baseball by the end of the night. When the bill comes, the boys scrap up their change to pay for the food. When Jessica puts her golden card down, they're shocked, but she explains that it's her father wanting her to build her credit. Asking her to take it back, Gio lets her know that he's paying, like the true gentleman he is. After having dinner, they split into different cars, but Chris calls go to the side. Gio hurries to him, leaving her alone only for Chris to ask him to steal a stereo. Finding his idea insane, Gio lets him know that there's no chance, but Chris ends up convincing him somehow. Just as they take out the stereo, Jessica comes looking for Gio and sees what they're doing. Gio tries to come up with a lie, but Chris tells her the truth, claiming that it's for the best. Poised at Chris, he decides to drive Jessica back home, assuming that she wouldn't want to do anything with him. Surprisingly, she doesn't get mad but asks him to teach her how he does it. And that's exactly what they do the following morning. Meeting up in the parking lot, Gio scans the place before finding the perfect car for them to steal the stereo from. However, instead of letting him do it, she asks for the metal pole. He is skeptical, but she takes it out of his hand and proceeds to successfully steal it. As she holds it in her hands, she asks what to do with it, and he tells her to run. Their evening is also filled with lots of steamy adventures, but as they lay in the car, she lets him know that she's so happy to have met him. Feeling bold, she suggests they go to the city the following day to explore it together. Gio is down for it, however. He admits that he doesn't go often. So the following day, we see him dressed up in a suit, ready to catch the train to town. Chris sees him, and naturally, he makes fun of him for letting her play him. Regardless, he doesn't listen to him and decides to go with the plan. They meet up in the city, and after walking around for a while, they decide to explore some shops. From clothing stores to museums, Jessica takes Gio everywhere and has no problem explaining something if he doesn't know what it is. They visit the music store, and Gio admits that he hasn't heard most of the artists, so she buys him a record from one of her favorite groups and asks him to trust her. They take a break in the park, so Jessica decides to ask him about his future plans after talking about hers. Looking at her weirdly, Gio admits that he doesn't have any plans for the future as he hasn't thought that ahead. Before they return to their towns, they visit one of Jessica's favorite museums. While admiring the painting, Jessica lets him know that she would love to live in the painting, but he prefers to live in reality. Looking at him with a smile, she lets him know that he's very smart, which surprises him. He doesn't believe her, but she assures him that he's smart, just hasn't seen any of the world yet. No one's ever told him that he's smart, so her telling him that melts his heart and makes him fall in love with him even more. Returning home, Gio decides to give the record a shot, so she listens to it immediately. He ends up loving it, and as Jessica calls him, he assures her that he's having a good time. Although they haven't been going out for long, it's evident that Gio's in love, and he can't seem to hide it. Their next outing is to the club, where we can see them swaying their bodies into one another and letting the music guide them. Every time he goes out with her, time doesn't seem to be on his side. While being cuddly on the train, Gio realizes that his stop is next, and he gets sad. Kissing her goodbye, we see him standing outside the train before he walks home. Getting to their neighborhood, he gets stopped by Chris, who decides to lecture him about his relationship. He thinks that Jessica is using him as her summer fling, and is sure that she'll forget about him in the fall when she goes to college. Gio doesn't say anything back, but it's evident that it's eating him alive. To ease his mind, he decides to drive around, but he keeps clenching his jaw as Chris's words repeat in his mind. Deep down, he knows that he's somewhat right, but he doesn't want to face the future. Regardless of his doubts, he continues to see Jessica because he loves spending time with her. They go to the movies next and seem to be having the best time ever. Walking out of the cinema, he asks whether she's hungry, and as always, she tells him that she's starved. However, instead of going to the same diner, he lets her know that he'll be taking her to try the most authentic Italian food in town. Shortly, they pull up to his house, and she gets scared to meet his parents. Holding her hand, he guides her inside, and his family is surprised to see that he's bringing a girl. Despite being unprepared, Jessica ends up passing the test, as his parents seem to love her. They especially like the fact that she's educated, knowing that a smart woman would be of great influence on their son. The dinner goes smoothly, but the trouble begins after it. Gio notices that she's acting weird, so he asks if there's something wrong, but she assures him that there's nothing wrong. Getting to her house, he asks for a tour, but she turns him down, promising to do it next time. Knowing now that Chris had been right the whole time, he asked him to go around the block, so the boys hit the streets just as they used to. Although he tries going back to his previous life, Gio is miserable because he knows that he'll never have a real shot with Jessica. No matter how much she likes him, she'll never be allowed to be with a boy like him. He spends the next couple of days, dissociated and disappointed, desperately trying to reach her. Surprisingly, she ends up answering after so long, so he asks to see her. She doesn't want to see him as she keeps trying to come up with excuses. Assuming that he won't see her unless he suggests something crazy, he invites her to one last adventure before they go their own ways. He invites her to steal a car with him, even though he's never done that. Naturally, she finds the idea very thrilling, which is why she accepts in the end. Given that he doesn't know how to steal a car, he goes to Chris for help. Chris can't believe that he's willing to risk that much for a girl, but Gio doesn't listen to him. Having no choice, Chris demonstrates to him how to steal a car, and he wastes no time practicing it with Jessica. However, as they get into the car, two guys come banging on the back of it. Panicked, Gia gets out only to see Chris and Anthony laugh their asses off. Coincidentally, a real cop comes out of the parking lot, so they jump into the car and book it. While trying to check the radio, they see a big packaging hidden behind it. Picking it up, Gio opens it and has a taste before realizing that it's pure. Not only does each of them have a go, but they decide to take it to a party and snort almost half of it. Little do they know what kind of trouble it will bring them. After the party, the group heads to the park where Gio comes clean to Jessica. She tries to leave early, but he asks her to stay. However, she keeps making up excuses to leave. Having had enough, he asks her to do something ballsy, and that is to become his girlfriend despite all the differences between them. She doesn't dare to do that, so he lets her know that she's a coward. He drives her home, and despite all the harsh words, he wishes her the best in life. Coming to the parking lot, he realizes that he's still in the stolen car, but he realizes it a bit too late. Getting out of the car, he gets beat up by the owner, who rightfully gets back at him. However, the car isn't their biggest concern. The little packet is. Given that it's not in the car, they follow him so he can hand it to them. Gio takes them to Chris's, but they don't seem to have it. Quickly, he realizes that it must be at Jessica's, so they make him call her. However, calling her only comes out to be an awful idea, as she decides to come to them. She arrives unaware of the danger, but when the owner sees that 75 grams are missing, he locks them all up inside. The owner tells them that they have an hour to get $6,000, so Gio promises to bring them. His plan is to race with a random guy, and whoever loses gets the loser's car. Gio wins like every time, but his opponent ends up crashing his car. With a heavy heart, Gio returns and hands his car over, despite it being his prized possession. He and Jessica sit on the stairs. As the situation simmers down, he lets her know that he's never stolen a car, but that he'd done it just to see her. She leaves without saying anything, but comes back only to pick him up and drive him to her place. As they get there, her parents greet him, and Jessica introduces him as her boyfriend. A couple of weeks later, we see that the lovebirds are still going strong as he comes to pick her up from college, in a cheaper but working car.